My father died believing he'd made our family financially secure for generations. And for the first 4 months after his funeral, none of us had any idea he was right. Because the $2.3 million he'd quietly built in Bitcoin, starting back in 2013, existed only as a string of numbers on a piece of paper we couldn't find, protected by a 12-word seed phrase that had died with him. My younger brother, Kevin, found what looked like our answer roughly 5 months after the funeral. A blockchain recovery specialist named Marcus Webb, who claimed, through a combination of forensic software and what he described as industry contacts at major exchanges, that he could recover access to our father's wallet for a modest, contingency-based fee once the funds were successfully retrieved. Kevin brought Marcus into our family's confidence completely, handled every communication with him directly, and told the rest of us, month after month, that recovery was close, just a few more technical steps away. It took me 11 months to discover that Marcus Webb didn't need any special technical skill to access our father's wallet, because he already had the seed phrase, handed to him, we would eventually prove, by Kevin himself, who had found it in our father's desk 2 weeks after the funeral, and had spent the following 11 months orchestrating an elaborate, technically sophisticated theater of difficult recovery. Slowly moving our father's entire fortune into wallets Kevin and Marcus controlled together, one carefully disguised transaction at a time. If you're new here, welcome to Family Hidden Fight, where we tell you the truth about the wars fought behind closed doors, inside families, including, in today's story, a war fought in a place most families have no idea to even look, the blockchain itself. Today's story is called The Wallet He Never Talked About. Let's begin. My name is Amanda Sorensen. I'm 38 years old. I work as a marketing director in Seattle, and my father, Richard Sorensen, died 14 months ago of a sudden cardiac arrest at the age of 66, an unexpected loss that left our family, in the immediate aftermath, navigating the same raw, disorienting grief that so many of the families featured on this channel have described before in our specific case. That grief became entangled with a genuinely strange and modern kind of financial mystery none of us had any real experience navigating. My father worked for 31 years as a mechanical engineer for an aerospace supplier outside Seattle, a steady, unglamorous career that provided our family a comfortable, if unremarkable, middle-class life throughout my childhood. What none of us fully appreciated, until after his death, was that my father had also been a genuinely early, serious cryptocurrency investor, purchasing his first Bitcoin in 2013, at a price, we would later calculate, of roughly $130 per coin, and continuing to accumulate additional holdings, gradually and consistently, over the following decade, an investment that had grown, by the time of his death, into a position worth, at the cryptocurrency market's prevailing prices at that time, approximately $2.3 million. I want to explain why none of us knew about this, because I think it's genuinely important context for understanding how this entire situation was able to unfold the way it did. My father was, by nature, a private, somewhat old-fashioned man when it came to financial matters, someone who rarely discussed the specifics of his investments or retirement planning with any of his 3 adult children, me, my younger brother Kevin, and our older sister, Christine. He had mentioned, on a few occasions over the years, some vague, general interest in this cryptocurrency stuff. Comments we'd all, at the time, understood as a mild, somewhat eccentric hobby interest, rather than a genuinely significant portion of his overall retirement wealth. We discovered the actual scope of my father's cryptocurrency holdings roughly 6 weeks after his funeral, while going through his home office as part of the broader, difficult process of sorting through his personal effects and financial records, a process that turned up a printed brokerage statement from a cryptocurrency exchange, showing a holdings balance that, once we understood what we were actually looking at, produced a specific, disorienting mixture of shock, and I want to be honest, a genuine flicker of relief amid our grief. Given the financial security this unexpected discovery seemed to promise our family. The problem, which became clear almost immediately once we began trying to actually understand how to access these funds, was that the specific exchange statement we'd found only reflected a portion of my father's total holdings. A relatively modest account balance of roughly $180,000 held directly on a centralized exchange platform, an amount that, while significant, considerably underrepresented the roughly $2.3 million total we would eventually determine my father had actually accumulated, the vast majority of which, we came to understand, he had transferred, at various points over the preceding decade, into what's called cold storage, a hardware wallet device, kept offline and disconnected from the internet specifically for enhanced security, protected by a 12-word recovery seed phrase that functions as the sole absolute key to accessing the funds it protects, with no password reset option, no customer service line to call, and no institutional recourse whatsoever if that seed phrase is ever lost. We found the hardware wallet device itself, a small, unassuming piece of hardware resembling a USB drive, tucked into the back of a locked desk drawer in my father's home office. We did not find, anywhere in his personal effects, any record of the 12-word seed phrase required to actually access the funds it protected. I want to describe the specific, exhausting weeks that followed. As our family, none of us possessing any significant prior technical expertise regarding cryptocurrency security, attempted to understand exactly what we were dealing with and what options, if any, existed for recovering access to funds that represented, by that point, a genuinely significant portion of my father's total estate. We consulted, during this period, with a cryptocurrency-focused estate attorney in Seattle, a specialist named Jonathan Pierce, who explained, with a directness I found genuinely sobering, exactly how absolute the loss of a seed phrase actually is within cryptocurrency's underlying technical architecture. I want to be honest with you about the fundamental reality here, Jonathan told us during our first consultation. Unlike a traditional bank account, where a lost password can be reset through identity verification and institutional processes, a cryptocurrency hardware wallet seed phrase is, by design, the sole cryptographically absolute key to the funds it protects. There is no institution to call, no customer service department, no legal process that can force access without that specific phrase. If your father genuinely never recorded it anywhere accessible, or if he recorded it somewhere none of you have yet located, those funds may be permanently, irretrievably lost. A genuinely common outcome, unfortunately, in early cryptocurrency estates, precisely because the technology's core security feature, protecting funds from theft, also protects them from any recovery mechanism whatsoever once the necessary information is lost. This explanation launched our family into a genuinely exhaustive search, over the following several months, through every conceivable location my father might have recorded his seed phrase: old notebooks, safety deposit boxes, encrypted files on his personal computer, even at one increasingly desperate point. A careful re-examination of several old family photographs, on the theory that he might have hidden the phrase in some kind of visual code or reference only a family member would recognize. It was during this exhausting, largely unsuccessful search period, roughly 5 months after our father's death, that my brother Kevin first mentioned, during one of our regular family check-in calls, that he'd connected with someone who might be able to help. I found this guy through a cryptocurrency recovery forum, Kevin told the rest of us during that call. His name is Marcus Webb. He's got genuinely impressive credentials, former work at a couple of major exchanges, specific expertise in exactly this kind of hardware wallet recovery situation. He says there are technical approaches involving analyzing patterns in how the hardware wallet was used, cross-referencing partial phrase fragments if we can find any, that sometimes allow recovery even without the full, complete seed phrase in hand. I want to be honest that, at the time, none of us, me, Christine, or our mother, who remained understandably overwhelmed by the broader grief of losing her husband of 39 years, and had, largely, deferred to Kevin's more technically confident engagement with this specific aspect of the estate, possessed the technical background to meaningfully evaluate whether Marcus Webb's claimed expertise and methodology were genuinely legitimate or not. Kevin, who worked as a software engineer and had always been, among the three of us siblings, the one with the most natural technical fluency and confidence, became, by a combination of his own initiative and the rest of our family's understandable deference to his relative expertise, the primary point of contact managing our entire relationship with Marcus and the broader recovery effort. Over the following several months, Kevin provided periodic updates to the rest of the family regarding Marcus's ongoing recovery efforts. Updates that, I want to describe honestly, followed a specific, consistent pattern that, in retrospect, I recognize as a carefully calibrated performance of technical progress designed to maintain our patience and continued trust without ever quite delivering the actual complete resolution that would have required Kevin to more directly account for exactly what was actually happening. Marcus thinks he's identified a partial fragment pattern that narrows down the possible phrase combinations significantly, Kevin reported, during one family call roughly 2 months after Marcus's initial involvement began. It's still going to take some time to fully verify, but this is genuine progress. The exchange Marcus has contacts and is willing to help cross-reference some of Dad's old transaction patterns, which should help narrow things down further, Kevin reported, during another call roughly a month later. This kind of forensic work takes real time to do properly and safely. Marcus has been very clear that rushing this process risks accidentally locking the wallet permanently if we attempt too many incorrect access attempts. I want to describe why these specific kinds of updates, vague enough to sound technically plausible while never quite committing to a concrete, verifiable claim or timeline, were so effective at maintaining our family's continued patience and trust, particularly given how genuinely, technically complex, and unfamiliar this entire situation was to the rest of us. Kevin's updates consistently invoked exactly the kind of specialized, unfamiliar technical language that made independent verification feel genuinely difficult for the rest of us to attempt, while also consistently emphasizing the genuine, real risks of rushing or attempting unauthorized access. A framing that discouraged any of us from pushing too hard or too quickly for more direct verification. Out of genuine concern that doing so might actually jeopardize the recovery effort itself. The first genuine crack in this carefully maintained narrative appeared roughly 9 months into Marcus's involvement, during a family gathering for my mother's birthday, when Christine, my older sister, mentioned, in an offhand comment during dinner, that she'd recently started learning some basic cryptocurrency concepts herself, prompted by her own curiosity about the ongoing recovery effort, and had a specific, technical question she hoped Kevin could help clarify. I've been reading about how blockchain transactions work, Christine said, and I don't fully understand something about what Marcus has described. If the hardware wallet itself is still physically locked, without the seed phrase, how would analyzing transaction patterns actually help recover access to it? Wouldn't the wallet's contents just be completely inaccessible either way, regardless of what patterns anyone identifies? Kevin's response to this specific, genuinely reasonable technical question, I recognized only in retrospect, marked a subtle but real shift in his usual confident, detailed explanatory pattern. A noticeably vaguer, more deflecting answer than his typical updates. Something along the lines of "it's more complicated than that. There are some specific technical approaches Marcus uses that go beyond what a general understanding of blockchain would suggest." An answer that, at the time, I accepted without significant additional pushback, but that Christine, I would later learn, found genuinely unsatisfying enough that she began, quietly and independently, doing her own more serious research into cryptocurrency recovery methods. Christine, over the following 2 months, without initially telling Kevin or the rest of the family about her growing concerns, conducted her own independent research into legitimate cryptocurrency recovery services, consulting with several actual verified blockchain forensics firms to understand what genuine recovery efforts, in a situation like ours, would actually and realistically look like. What she learned from these independent, verified sources was genuinely alarming. legitimate cryptocurrency recovery, in a situation involving a genuinely, completely lost seed phrase with no partial fragments or backup records available, is, in the overwhelming majority of cases, simply not possible, regardless of technical sophistication or claimed exchange contacts. A hard technical reality that several of the legitimate firms Christine consulted with confirmed directly and without hedging, several of whom. Once Christine described the general shape of Marcus's ongoing, months-long recovery process, without initially naming him specifically, expressed immediate, serious concern that we might be dealing with exactly the kind of recovery scam that has become, they explained, an increasingly common and sophisticated form of fraud targeting grieving families exactly like ours. I want to be very direct with you, one of the legitimate forensics specialists Christine consulted, a woman named Priya Anand at a well-established blockchain security firm, told her during their consultation. If someone has been telling your family, for 9 months, that they're making incremental technical progress toward recovering a genuinely, completely lost seed phrase, without any concrete, verifiable milestone or clear technical explanation of exactly what methodology is being used, that pattern is, unfortunately, extremely consistent with either a deliberate, ongoing scam, or, in a less common but still concerning scenario, someone who may already have access to the wallet and is deliberately delaying and obscuring that fact for reasons of their own. Christine called me directly, rather than immediately confronting Kevin, roughly 2 months into her independent research. Once she'd gathered enough concerning information from legitimate industry sources that she felt she could no longer keep her growing suspicions entirely to herself. I need to tell you something, and I need you to actually hear the whole thing before you react, Christine told me, during a call that I remember, even now, as one of the more genuinely disorienting conversations of the entire ordeal. I don't think Marcus is who Kevin thinks he is, and I'm starting to genuinely wonder whether Kevin himself actually already found Dad's seed phrase months ago and has been running this entire recovery story as cover for something else. I want to describe the specific, difficult process of actually absorbing that suggestion, coming as it did about my own younger brother, someone I had trusted completely throughout this entire ordeal, someone who had, as far as I understood, been working hard on all our behalf to solve a genuinely difficult, technical problem the rest of us lacked the expertise to meaningfully engage with ourselves. I don't want to believe that either, Christine said, hearing my initial, instinctive resistance to her suggestion. But Amanda, I've now talked to 3 separate, legitimate experts, and every single one of them told me, independently, that what Kevin's been describing to us for 9 months doesn't actually make technical sense as a genuine recovery process. Either Marcus is running an elaborate, sophisticated scam that Kevin himself is also being deceived by, or something considerably more concerning is happening, involving Kevin directly. I think we need to find out which one it actually is, and I don't think we can find that out by continuing to simply trust Kevin's own updates without any independent verification. Christine and I, working together, and at this stage, still keeping our growing concerns private from Kevin and from our mother, retained our own independent blockchain forensics investigator, a specialist named Daniel Ackhaffer, who worked for a firm specializing specifically in cryptocurrency fraud investigation and asset tracing, to conduct an independent, thorough review of the actual situation, entirely separate from whatever Marcus had been representing to Kevin. Daniel's first, critical step involved something genuinely simple that, in retrospect, none of us had thought to independently verify throughout the preceding 9 months. Directly, independently confirming the hardware wallet's actual current status through the blockchain's own public, permanently recorded transaction ledger, a resource that, Daniel explained, provides completely transparent, independently verifiable information about any wallet address's transaction history, entirely separate from and unable to be manipulated by whatever narrative any individual party might be providing about a wallet's status. What Daniel found, within a single day of beginning this independent verification, confirmed Christine's worst fears with a directness that left both of us genuinely stunned. Our father's original hardware wallet address once Daniel located and began tracing its full transaction history through the public blockchain record, showed a series of transactions beginning roughly 2 weeks after our father's funeral. Transactions moving portions of the total holdings, gradually, and in relatively small, carefully staggered increments over the following months, into a series of intermediate wallet addresses, ultimately consolidating. Through several additional transfer steps clearly designed to obscure the fund's final destination, into 2 final wallet addresses that Daniel's further investigation was able to connect, through a combination of exchange records and transaction pattern analysis, to accounts controlled by Kevin himself and by Marcus Webb. Daniel's investigation, once it became clear that the wallet had, in fact, already been successfully accessed beginning just 2 weeks after our father's death, raised an obvious, urgent question. How had Kevin, or Marcus, or both of them together, actually obtained the seed phrase in the first place, if it had genuinely never been found anywhere in our father's personal effects during the family's own initial, thorough search? The answer, once Christine and I finally, directly confronted Kevin with Daniel's blockchain findings roughly 2 weeks after receiving his initial report, came from Kevin himself, in a confrontation that occurred at our mother's house, a conversation I want to describe as carefully and honestly as I can, given how genuinely difficult and painful it ultimately proved to be. I found it, Kevin admitted, once Christine laid out Daniel's blockchain evidence in specific, undeniable detail, his voice carrying a specific mixture of defensiveness, and I want to be honest, what appeared to be genuine, if deeply complicated, shame. About 2 weeks after the funeral, it was written on the inside cover of one of Dad's old technical manuals, in his home office, tucked into a bookshelf none of us had gotten to yet in our initial search. I found it, and I didn't tell any of you. Why, Kevin? I asked, my voice shaking with a specific combination of grief, anger, and genuine bewilderment I hadn't fully anticipated feeling even amid everything Daniel's investigation had already revealed. Why would you do this to us? To Mom. Kevin's explanation, over the following difficult hour of conversation, described a specific financial crisis he had been navigating privately, entirely unknown to the rest of our family. A series of failed personal investments, alongside what he described as significant credit card debt he'd accumulated and never disclosed to any of us. A financial situation that had left him, by his own account, genuinely desperate and specifically, deliberately tempted. Upon discovering the seed phrase, to quietly divert a meaningful portion of the funds for his own benefit before revealing the recovery to the rest of the family, rationalizing, at least initially, that he intended to eventually find the wallet properly and simply keep whatever amount he'd already privately diverted, framing it in his own mind as something closer to an advance on his eventual, legitimate inheritance share rather than outright theft from the broader family estate. I want to clarify Marcus Webb's actual role in this scheme. Once Daniel's investigation and Kevin's own eventual admission established the fuller picture, because it differed somewhat from the initial assumption Christine and I had operated under during our own independent investigation. Marcus, it turned out, was not, as we'd initially suspected might be the case, a legitimate recovery specialist being independently deceived alongside the rest of us. He was, instead, a direct accomplice Kevin had specifically recruited, roughly 1 month after privately discovering the seed phrase, to provide exactly the kind of technically credible, third-party cover story that would allow Kevin to gradually, methodically move the family's funds into accounts he and Marcus jointly controlled, while maintaining, throughout, the appearance of a genuine, ongoing, difficult recovery effort that provided plausible cover for both the extended timeline and the eventual planned explanation for why full recovery had, ultimately, proven only partially successful. Kevin's original plan, according to his own eventual, fuller account of the scheme, involved eventually presenting the family with a partial, reduced recovery, claiming, once the funds had been sufficiently obscured and distributed across various accounts he and Marcus controlled, that Marcus's recovery efforts had ultimately succeeded in accessing only a portion of the original holdings, perhaps $800,000 to $1 million of the original $2.3 million. with the remainder framed as permanently, technically unrecoverable. A plan that would have allowed Kevin to quietly retain the majority of the difference for himself and Marcus, while still presenting himself to the rest of the family as the person who had, ultimately, heroically salvaged a meaningful portion of what everyone else believed was likely a total, permanent loss. Marcus's specific compensation for his role in this scheme, Daniel's investigation eventually determined, involved a negotiated 40% share of whatever funds Kevin ultimately successfully diverted through their joint efforts. A genuinely substantial cut that reflected, Daniel noted, the real, specialized technical expertise Marcus's actual involvement required, even though that expertise was being deployed toward obscuring an already completed theft rather than toward any genuine, legitimate recovery effort. Christine and I, working with Jonathan Pierce and a separate criminal defense and prosecution referral process, pursued a dual legal response to what Kevin and Marcus had done, a civil claim seeking full recovery of the diverted funds on behalf of the broader family estate, alongside a criminal referral to both local law enforcement and the FBI, given the interstate and technically sophisticated nature of the fraud. I want to describe the specific, genuinely painful family dynamics that shaped how this legal response unfolded, because pursuing formal legal and criminal accountability against one's own brother, however clearly justified by the facts, introduced a layer of difficulty and grief distinct from anything the other stories on this channel involving more distant family relationships have fully captured. Our mother, upon learning the full truth about what Kevin had done, experienced a specific, devastating combination of grief about her husband's death, now compounded by the discovery that one of her own children had exploited that death for personal financial gain, targeting funds that represented, in a very real sense, her own husband's life's work and intended legacy for the entire family. "I don't know how to hold both of these things," my mother told me during one particularly difficult conversation shortly after Kevin's admission. "I love him. He's still my son. And I also understand completely why what he did requires real, serious consequences. I don't know how a mother is supposed to feel two such completely opposite things about her own child at the exact same time." Ultimately, following extensive family discussion and consultation with Jonathan, we made the difficult, collective decision to pursue the civil recovery claim in full, while declining to actively push for separate criminal prosecution against Kevin specifically, choosing instead to allow the criminal investigation to proceed primarily against Marcus, whose role, as an outside accomplice with no family relationship or legitimate claim to any portion of the estate whatsoever, carried none of the same complicated, painful family dynamics our decision regarding Kevin required us to navigate. Daniel's continued forensic tracing, combined with formal legal subpoenas Jonathan was able to obtain against the various cryptocurrency exchanges where Kevin and Marcus had ultimately moved, and in some cases, begun converting portions of the diverted funds into traditional currency, ultimately allowed for the successful recovery and freezing of approximately $1.9 million of the original $2.3 million. A recovery rate that Daniel characterized as genuinely favorable given the technical sophistication of the diversion scheme, though it left a meaningful remaining gap of roughly $400,000 that Marcus, it turned out, had already successfully converted and, according to the ongoing criminal investigation, largely spent or otherwise placed beyond straightforward recovery before our own independent investigation had even begun. Kevin, as part of the eventual civil settlement our family reached, agreed to a structured repayment arrangement covering his own remaining share of the unrecovered funds, secured against his future income and any remaining personal assets. An arrangement that, Jonathan explained, reflected a genuinely more favorable outcome for our broader family's actual financial recovery than a more purely adversarial civil judgment might have produced. Given how difficult full civil judgment recovery often proves against a family member, with genuinely limited independent assets, beyond whatever had already been recovered through the direct blockchain tracing and exchange freezing process. I want to describe, honestly, where my relationship with Kevin currently stands, roughly 6 months after the full truth came to light and the broader legal and financial resolutions substantially concluded. I have not fully reconciled with Kevin, and I want to be honest that I don't know, even now, whether I ever fully will, in the complete, uncomplicated sense that word sometimes implies. We speak occasionally, primarily connected through our mother, and through the practical, ongoing logistics of the settlement's structured repayment arrangement. But the easy, close relationship we shared throughout our entire lives before this happened has not yet, and may never fully, return to what it once was. I understand if you can't forgive me, Kevin told me, during one of our few, still genuinely difficult direct conversations since everything came to light. I think about it constantly, what I actually did to you, to Christine, to Mom, using Dad's own death, and the trust all of you extended me during the worst period of all our lives, as the specific opportunity to do something this genuinely wrong. I don't have a good explanation that makes it feel less awful, even to myself, no matter how many times I try to work through the specific financial desperation that led me toward that first, initial decision not to tell everyone the truth the moment I found that seed phrase. I told Kevin, honestly, that I appreciated his acknowledgement, but that acknowledgement alone, however genuine, couldn't simply erase or repair what had actually happened. That rebuilding any meaningful trust between us would require considerably more time and considerably more consistent, demonstrated change than any single conversation, however honest, could accomplish on its own. I want to close with something Daniel Ackhaffer, our forensics investigator, told me near the conclusion of this entire ordeal, because I think it offers genuinely important, broadly applicable guidance for any family navigating cryptocurrency assets within an estate. Cryptocurrency inheritance situations are becoming considerably more common, and I expect that trend to continue accelerating for the next couple of decades, as the generation of early adopters like your father continues aging, Daniel told me. The specific vulnerability your family's situation illustrates: a technically unfamiliar family, deferring to whichever member has the most relative technical confidence, without any independent verification mechanism, is, unfortunately, an extremely common pattern in the cryptocurrency fraud cases I investigate. My strongest, most universal recommendation for any family navigating a situation like yours is to always, immediately, retain your own independent, verified forensics or legal expertise, entirely separate from whatever specific individual or service any single family member has personally located or vouched for before extending significant, ongoing trust to any recovery process, however technically credible it might sound. The blockchain's own public ledger, importantly, provides a genuinely powerful, independently verifiable source of truth that any family in a situation like yours should learn to directly consult, rather than relying entirely on any single party's own narrative account of what is or isn't technically possible. That guidance: always seek independent verification, and understand that the blockchain's public ledger itself provides a genuine, checkable source of truth, has become, for me, one of the single most practically useful lessons to emerge from this entire ordeal, something I now share, consistently, with anyone I encounter navigating a similar cryptocurrency inheritance situation. I want to go back and explain something about the specific forum where Kevin claimed to have originally located Marcus Webb, because Daniel's investigation eventually revealed that even this initial discovery story had been carefully constructed rather than genuinely accidental. Daniel's investigation, tracing back through Kevin's own digital communications once the broader civil discovery process compelled their production, revealed that Kevin had not, in fact, stumbled upon Marcus through an independent, genuine forum search roughly 1 month after finding the seed phrase, as he'd originally told the rest of the family. Instead, Kevin had specifically, deliberately searched out and identified Marcus through a considerably more obscure, less reputable online community, one Daniel described as having a documented reputation within legitimate cryptocurrency security circles for connecting individuals seeking exactly this kind of quiet, ethically flexible technical assistance. A community, Daniel explained. Considerably more likely to include individuals willing to help obscure or launder cryptocurrency transactions than genuine, above-board recovery specialists of the kind Christine's own later, legitimate research had actually located. This detail mattered considerably to the eventual legal case against Kevin specifically, because it established, considerably more clearly than his own initial, vaguer admission had, that his choice to bring Marcus into the situation reflected a specific, deliberate search for someone equipped and willing to help him actively divert and obscure the funds, rather than any kind of gradual, escalating temptation that began with a genuine, if ultimately compromised, attempt at legitimate recovery assistance. I want you to understand why this distinction mattered so much to how I approached your family's case, Jonathan told me, once this fuller picture had emerged through discovery. There's a meaningful legal and, frankly, moral difference between someone who discovers access to funds, is tempted, and then makes an escalating series of increasingly serious wrong choices over time, versus someone who, upon discovering that access, immediately and deliberately sets out to build a sophisticated theft and concealment operation from the very beginning. Kevin's own actions, once we understood the full timeline, reflected considerably more of the latter than the more sympathetic version of events his own initial admission to your family had suggested. I want to share something Jonathan helped us discover, roughly midway through the broader legal process, that added an additional, meaningful dimension to this entire story. Evidence of what our father had actually, specifically intended regarding his cryptocurrency holdings, discovered through a combination of his personal email records and a handwritten note found, eventually, tucked inside the same technical manual where Kevin had found the seed phrase itself. The note, dated roughly 2 years before our father's death, described his own reasoning for keeping the cryptocurrency holdings details private from the family during his lifetime. A choice he explained, in his own words, as reflecting genuine concern about how knowledge of a rapidly appreciating, volatile asset might affect his children's own financial decision-making and life choices, while he remained alive to continue managing it directly, alongside a stated intention to eventually. At some point, he'd apparently kept deferring, have a full, direct conversation with all 3 of us about the holdings and his specific wishes for how they should eventually be divided. The note also specified, in language Jonathan confirmed held genuine legal weight as evidence of my father's clear, documented intent, that he wanted the eventual cryptocurrency holdings divided equally among all 3 of his children, me, Christine, and Kevin, precisely the same, straightforward equal division his broader, formally executed will had specified for the remainder of his estate. I want to describe what it felt like, reading that note, understanding that our father had, in his own hand, specifically and clearly intended for Kevin to receive exactly the same equal share as Christine and me. A share Kevin could have simply, honestly claimed, the moment he discovered the seed phrase, by disclosing that discovery immediately to the rest of us, rather than attempting to secretly divert additional funds beyond what our father had always, clearly intended he receive. He would have gotten his fair third, Amanda, Christine said, once we'd both finished reading that note together, her voice carrying a specific, exhausted grief that I recognized because I felt it just as acutely myself. He didn't need to do any of this. Dad already planned to give him exactly what he eventually tried to steal an even larger amount instead of. I don't think I'll ever fully understand why that wasn't enough for him. I want to describe one final, somewhat unusual element of our eventual civil settlement, because I think it reflects something genuinely thoughtful that emerged from our family's difficult, ongoing effort to balance real accountability with our continued desire, however complicated, to preserve some eventual path toward family reconciliation. Beyond the structured financial repayment arrangement, Kevin agreed to. Our settlement included a specific, negotiated provision requiring Kevin to complete a comprehensive financial counseling, and, separately, a family therapy program specifically focused on financial ethics and family trust rebuilding, a provision Jonathan had initially been somewhat skeptical of including as a formal, enforceable settlement term, given how unusual it was relative to the more standard. Purely financial provisions, typical of cases like ours. "I understand why you want this included," Jonathan told us during the negotiation process, "and I respect that your family's goals here go beyond simple financial recovery. I want to be honest that formal settlement agreements don't typically include this kind of provision, and enforcing genuine compliance with a therapeutic requirement like this is considerably more complicated than enforcing a straightforward financial repayment schedule. But if this genuinely reflects what your family wants to prioritize, I can help structure it as a meaningful, if imperfect, part of the broader agreement." Kevin has, in the 6 months since the settlement, actually engaged genuinely and consistently with both the financial counseling and the family therapy process. According to regular updates, our mother, who has remained the family member most directly, consistently involved in supporting this specific aspect of Kevin's ongoing accountability, has shared with the rest of us. "I don't know if it's enough yet to fully rebuild what he broke," our mother told me during a recent conversation about Kevin's ongoing progress. "But I think it matters that he's actually doing the hard, unglamorous work of trying to understand himself well enough that something like this could never happen again, rather than just paying back the money and considering the whole thing closed. I think that's the only version of this that gives any of us a real, honest path back toward each other, eventually, even if none of us know exactly how long that path is going to take." I want to close with something small but meaningful. The specific, ongoing habit I've built into my own life since this entire ordeal, learning enough about how to independently verify blockchain transactions myself, that I no longer feel entirely dependent on any single expert or family member's account of what is or isn't happening with any digital asset our family might encounter in the future. Daniel spent several hours, near the conclusion of our work together, walking me through the basics of how to independently look up and interpret a public wallet address's transaction history myself. Not the full, specialized forensic tracing his own professional expertise provides, but enough of a working, practical understanding that I now feel genuinely capable of at least a basic, independent sanity check on any future situation involving cryptocurrency assets within our family. "You don't need to become an expert," Daniel told me during that final tutorial session. "You just need to understand enough to know when something doesn't add up, and enough to know when it's time to bring in genuine, independent verification rather than simply trusting whatever narrative you're being given." That's really the core lesson here, and it applies well beyond cryptocurrency specifically. Understanding just enough about any unfamiliar system to recognize when your own trust is being asked to substitute for verification you could, with a little effort, actually seek out yourself. I've thought about that guidance often, in the months since, not just as it applies to cryptocurrency specifically, but as a broader principle I've tried to carry into how I approach any unfamiliar financial or technical situation my family might encounter going forward. The specific vulnerability that allowed Kevin's scheme to continue undetected for 11 months wasn't really about cryptocurrency's technical complexity itself. It was about our family's collective willingness to let that complexity substitute for genuine, independent verification, deferring entirely to whichever family member happened to sound most confident, rather than seeking out the kind of outside, checkable truth that, it turned out, had been sitting in plain sight on a public blockchain ledger the entire time, waiting for any of us to simply learn how to look. For every family, an AVIGTNG, a digital inheritance. If you're watching this and your family is currently navigating, or anticipates someday navigating, an inheritance involving cryptocurrency or other digital assets, I want to say something directly to you, informed by everything this specific, modern kind of family hidden fight taught mine. Talk about it now, while everyone involved is still alive and able to have that conversation clearly and completely. My father's specific, understandable but ultimately costly choice to keep his cryptocurrency holdings and their access details entirely private, even from his own family, created exactly the kind of information vacuum that made everything that followed possible. If you hold cryptocurrency assets yourself, Build a clear, secure, but genuinely accessible plan for how your family will actually be able to access those funds after you're gone. A plan that doesn't depend on any single family member's private knowledge or on funds ever being discovered accidentally, months after your death, tucked into the pages of an old technical manual. If you're currently navigating a cryptocurrency recovery situation involving a lost or inaccessible seed phrase, seek independent, verified expertise immediately, entirely separate from whatever specific recovery service or specialist any individual family member has personally identified and vouched for. And understand that the blockchain's own public transaction ledger provides a genuine, independently verifiable source of truth that no legitimate recovery process should ever discourage you from directly consulting yourselves. My father built something genuinely remarkable, patiently and quietly, over a full decade, intending it as a lasting gift to the family he loved. It took a sibling's private financial desperation and 11 months of deliberately obscured technical theater to very nearly turn that gift into a permanent, undiscovered loss. I'm grateful every day that Christine's careful, persistent skepticism and her willingness to seek out genuine, independent expertise rather than simply continuing to trust an increasingly implausible ongoing narrative ultimately allowed us to recover the vast majority of what our father actually intended for all of us. My name is Amanda Sorensen, and this has been another family hidden fight. If this story reminded you of a digital asset, a cryptocurrency holding, or any modern financial complexity your own family hasn't yet fully planned for, use it as the prompt to finally have that conversation. Tell us your own story in the comments. It might become a future episode. Subscribe for a new family hidden fight story every week, and we'll see you in the next one.